My name is Amelia Tran, and for 14 years, I was the quiet force behind Hudson Price Consulting's most stable international partnerships. I didn't have a flashy job title or a loud personality. Still, I was the one our biggest clients trusted when millions of dollars and delicate cultural negotiations were on the line. I'm a Vietnamese American woman in my late 30s, raised by immigrant parents who taught me discipline and humility were worth more than any job title. I worked my way up from an entry-level analyst to the director of Southeast Asia partnerships without ever demanding recognition. I let my work speak for itself. And for a long time, it did. I never aimed to be the face of the company. I was more interested in being the backbone. Fluent in Vietnamese, conversational in Mandarin and Malay, I spent years traveling between our New York headquarters and client offices in Saigon, Jakarta, and Singapore. My strength wasn't just language, it was cultural fluency. I knew when to bow, when to remain silent, when to speak, and how to read a room with nothing more than a nod or the pause between words. In a business that often treated foreign clients like checkboxes, I made them feel seen. Respected. But that kind of value doesn't show up on a quarterly spreadsheet, and eventually, it gets overshadowed by someone louder, newer, and shinier. About a year ago, I started noticing the signs. Our CEO, Gregory Langford, was growing restless. He wanted headlines, innovation, and speed. He started using phrases like aggressive disruption and transformational leadership in every meeting. That's when I knew my quiet competence was about to be bulldozed by a marketing-friendly replacement. Enter Claire Monroe. She arrived one Monday morning like a thunderstorm in a designer coat. Claire was 28, blonde, charismatic, Ivy League educated, and completely unaware of the markets she was hired to lead. Her title, Executive Director of Global Growth Initiatives, sounded impressive but vague. It was clear from the start, she was being positioned to replace me, just without the courtesy of saying it to my face. I remember sitting through the meeting where she was introduced, listening as Gregory gushed about Claire's fresh perspective and visionary ideas. She talked about reinventing legacy systems and rebranding our global presence, all without acknowledging the teams and relationships already in place. She never once looked in my direction. A few days later, Gregory called me into his office. He told me how grateful he was for my contributions, how I'd brought us this far. But it was time for a new chapter. He asked me to support Claire's vision and transition into a more background role. Support. Transition. Words that meant, step aside. Smile. Don't cause trouble. I did what I always did, I smiled. But inside, something cold and calm settled into place. Claire might have the title. But she didn't have what mattered. She didn't understand the trust I'd earned, the cultural landmines I'd helped the company avoid, or the quiet power of respect. What they all forgot was simple. I wasn't just a middle manager, I was the bridge. And once they burned it, they were going to find themselves alone on an island, with no one to guide them through the storm that was coming. For a few months, I played along. I attended meetings. I offered insights when asked. I even coached Claire on nuances she didn't grasp, how certain clients expected formal greetings, the importance of indirect negotiation in Vietnamese business culture, or why silence during a meeting wasn't awkwardness, but respect. At first, she nodded like she appreciated it, scribbling notes in her little Moleskine, but soon I realized she wasn't listening. She was collecting sound bites, not understanding systems. She wanted shortcuts. Instant fluency. And when that didn't come fast enough, she defaulted to arrogance. It wasn't long before my presence was quietly downgraded. I used to sit beside Gregory during global strategy reviews, sometimes speaking on behalf of entire markets. Now, I found myself pushed 2 chairs down, no longer introduced to new partners or invited to pitch meetings. Claire began scheduling client calls without me, particularly with our Southeast Asian portfolio, where she assumed she could modernize the approach. She changed communication styles, ignored time zone sensitivities, and began emailing directly in English with a tone far too casual for our partners. At first, the clients responded with polite confusion. Then the replies slowed. Then they stopped. One afternoon, I received a message from Mr. Liu, the CFO of one of our biggest Vietnamese partners. His email was courteous but strained. He expressed confusion over new requests, noting that the tone of communication had shifted and implied a loss of mutual respect. He asked directly, though diplomatically, why I was no longer handling their account. My stomach twisted. We had spent years building trust with them, through long dinners, late-night calls, and careful compromise. Claire had undone it all in 2 emails. I forwarded the note to Claire, suggesting we approach the next meeting with cultural caution. She never replied. Later that week, I learned from one of the junior analysts that she had called me overly traditional in a leadership huddle. She told them she was unblocking outdated workflows and that I had become a barrier. A barrier. 14 years of work, and now I was a barrier to be removed. A week later, I was removed from all active client projects. Officially, I was put on reassessment, a vague HR term that meant they were trying to figure out how to make me leave without firing me. They offered a temporary internal role with no clear responsibilities. A quiet exile. I wasn't surprised. But I was deeply disappointed. I could have left then. Packed my things, sent a polite goodbye, and disappeared into LinkedIn job boards. But I didn't. Because this wasn't just about a job. This was about legacy, mine and the bridges I had built. They wanted to erase me like I was a line item in a budget. What they didn't realize was that erasing me would cost them far more than they'd budgeted for. So I stayed. I watched. And I waited. It was supposed to be Claire's triumph. Her first solo overseas trip representing our firm to one of our most important regional partners, Redbridge Technologies in Singapore. I had cultivated that relationship for over a decade, guiding it from cautious exchanges to a multimillion-dollar joint venture. Redbridge didn't just trust our company, they trusted me. Every contract had passed through my desk. Every negotiation had been rooted in mutual understanding. But Claire saw the partnership as outdated and inefficient. She believed she could streamline it and bring it into the modern era. She left for Singapore with 2 of our rising analysts in tow, neither of whom had ever left North America, let alone negotiated a cross-border technology licensing deal. I watched from afar as she prepped, ignoring every piece of documentation I offered. She never once asked for a briefing or context. To her, the future didn't need the past. She was already practicing her keynote speech before she'd earned the microphone. The disaster began quietly. An awkward meeting room photo posted by one of the analysts showed the Redbridge executives looking tense. Then came the silence, no updates, no progress reports. 2 days later, I got a call from Lena Wu, Redbridge's strategic director and one of my most trusted allies in the region. Her voice was tight, clipped. She didn't ask for pleasantries. She asked, "What happened to you, Amelia? Why weren't you on this trip?" I swallowed the knot in my throat and told her the truth, or most of it. I've been reassigned. Claire's leading this project now. There was a pause. Then, sharp but quiet, Lena replied. She walked into our boardroom like we were interns. She spoke over our CTO, ignored our cultural protocols, and proposed slashing development budgets without even understanding our strategic objectives. She called your former work legacy friction. Do you know what that means in our language? She insulted your decade of partnership in front of our chairman. My chest tightened. I'm sorry, Lena. Truly. I know this isn't you, Amelia, she said. But your company doesn't seem to value what you built. That matters. The next day, Redbridge suspended the partnership. Not cancelled, just paused for review. Internally, it was chaos. Gregory called an emergency meeting. Claire stammered through a defensive presentation filled with jargon and blame shifting. She claimed Redbridge wasn't ready to evolve and blamed cultural rigidity. But even Gregory couldn't ignore the $1 million hole it left in the quarter's forecast. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for a celebration. It wasn't for joy, I wasn't happy. I was heartbroken. But somewhere, deep beneath the frustration and grief, there was a flicker of clarity. Claire's arrogance had finally outpaced her charm. She had exposed herself, not by accident, but by design. And now the very bridges she'd tried to burn might be the only ones that could save the company. I didn't expect the call. Not that early on a Monday morning, and certainly not from my old mentor, Eleanor King. She'd been the VP of Global Strategy at Lawson & Reed until her retirement 2 years ago, one of the few people in this industry I both admired and trusted. When her name popped up on my phone, I answered instantly. "Amelia," she said, without preamble, "I heard about Singapore. Redbridge is rattled, and it sounds like your firm is hemorrhaging leadership and common sense." I laughed softly, bitterly. That's a polite way to put it. She didn't waste time. "I've come out of retirement to take on a private consulting role. Lawson & Reed is restructuring their Asia-Pacific division. I'm helping them rebuild it from the ground up. We want you." Quietly. "Off the record, for now. Are you interested?" I didn't answer right away. My mind was still in shock. Lawson & Reed was a global powerhouse, the kind of firm people dreamed of working for but rarely got the chance to approach, let alone be recruited by. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," she said. "I've seen what Claire did to your department. The people upstairs are finally realizing that not everything can be fixed with a Harvard MBA and a TED Talk. Your name came up more than once during the advisory board's review. They want someone who understands not just markets, but people. Culture. Strategy. You." A swirl of emotion spun inside me, relief, validation, apprehension. "Eleanor, I haven't even figured out what I want yet." "That's fine. But while you're figuring it out, we'd like you to quietly advise us on Redbridge. You know their leadership. You can help us open a dialogue." I hesitated. The idea of working with Redbridge again stirred a mix of guilt and longing. I'd spent a decade building that relationship, and watched it crumble in a matter of days. But maybe this was my chance to right the wrong. Not for the company that had discarded me, but for the clients who had trusted me. "Send the NDA," I said finally. "I'll review it tonight." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the city buzzed like it always did. My apartment was bathed in the soft gray light of morning, and everything felt different. Not because of some big victory, but because for the first time in months, someone hadn't asked me to prove my worth. They already saw it. Later that day, Claire barged into my office, red-faced and flustered. "Why didn't you warn me about Redbridge's protocol quirks?" I met her gaze calmly. "I tried. You told me to stay in my lane." Her mouth opened, then closed. No apology came. Just indignation. "You knew I was going to present and you let me fail." "No," I said. "You dismissed everything I spent years building and walked into a boardroom thinking charm would make up for insight. That wasn't failure. That was arrogance." She left without another word. And I, for once, didn't feel the sting of confrontation. I felt free. That night, I signed the NDA and sent it back to Eleanor. I wasn't ready to leave just yet, but I was ready to have options. Quiet power is still power. And I had just remembered how much of it I actually held. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope between two worlds. Officially, I was still with my old company, carrying the invisible weight of being sidelined and watched with suspicion. Unofficially, I was a ghost consultant for Lawson & Reed, quietly weaving the threads of a partnership that once meant everything to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Claire and Lucas pushed forward with reckless disregard, I was quietly doing the work that really mattered, rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. My first step was a carefully worded email to Lena Wu, the strategic director at Redbridge. I reminded her that relationships don't unravel overnight and expressed my genuine desire to make amends, not for my old company's mistakes, but for the value I believed still lay in our collaboration. She replied cautiously but invited me to a video call. It was a small victory, but in this game, every inch mattered. The call was tense but hopeful. I listened more than I spoke, absorbing Redbridge's frustrations, concerns, and cautious optimism. I knew that regaining their trust would take more than words. It would require demonstrating respect for their culture and a commitment to mutual benefit. Over the next few weeks, I coordinated with Lawson and Reed's Asia-Pacific team to propose a new project tailored specifically to Redbridge's strategic goals, a project Claire had dismissed as too traditional. Meanwhile, back at my former company, the atmosphere was shifting. Lucas's aggressive cost-cutting and disregard for client relationships were catching up to him. Rumors of his potential ousting floated through the office like a storm warning. I didn't gloat. I was too focused on the quiet work of rebuilding to waste energy on his downfall. But seeing the cracks widen felt like validation that I hadn't been wrong to step away. In my new role, I found a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, my experience and cultural knowledge were not just tolerated, they were celebrated. I was crafting strategy, mentoring younger colleagues, and most importantly, repairing bridges. Every email, every call, every thoughtful gesture became a brick in the foundation of a partnership reborn. Late one evening, after a particularly productive call with Redbridge's CEO, I sat back and let myself smile. This wasn't just about business anymore, it was about respect, about honoring the years of work that had gone unnoticed by those blinded by ambition. I wasn't just rebuilding a partnership, I was reclaiming my own power. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slip away. It wasn't long before the cracks in Lucas's empire became impossible to hide. The rumors I'd heard whispered in the hallways turned into official statements. The CEO called an emergency board meeting, and the company's public image took a hit as news leaked of lost contracts and internal chaos. For months, Lucas had been frantically trying to patch holes with spin and empty promises, but the damage was done. The leadership that once seemed untouchable was unraveling, and the blame was falling squarely on him. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of vindication and sadness. This wasn't a personal victory, it was a painful lesson about what happens when arrogance eclipses respect, when shortcuts replace wisdom. I'd been on the outside, watching a company I once loved implode because of reckless decisions that ignored the very foundation on which it was built, relationships and cultural understanding. Amidst the turmoil, I received a quiet message from Eleanor: the board is looking for stability. They want you to lead the Asia-Pacific division, officially this time. They believe you're the steady hand this company desperately needs. The offer was everything I had hoped for and nothing I expected. After the chaos Lucas left behind, stepping back in as a leader wasn't just about a job, it was about healing and rebuilding from the ground up. But I knew I had to be cautious. The scars ran deep, and many colleagues were skeptical, some even hostile. When I walked back into the Ridgemont headquarters, this time with a title that carried weight, I could feel the eyes on me, some wary, others resentful. But I was ready. My first address to the team was honest and clear. I didn't promise quick fixes or magic solutions. Instead, I spoke about respect, patience, and the power of listening. I emphasized that our strength came from understanding our clients, each other, and the cultures we served. The months that followed were grueling. Rebuilding a fractured team, repairing broken client relationships, and steering the company through public scrutiny was exhausting. But with each small success, a restored contract, a grateful client, a nod of approval from a colleague, I felt the tide turning. The company that had once pushed me out was slowly becoming a place where my expertise could shine, and where respect for nuance was no longer an afterthought. Lucas's fall from grace was a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and break rooms alike. But for me, it was a reminder that true leadership is earned, not given, that power rooted in arrogance is fleeting, while power grounded in respect and competence endures. And as I stood at the helm of the Asia-Pacific division, I knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the company, but for me. Taking the reins of the Asia-Pacific division was both exhilarating and daunting. The responsibility weighed heavily on my shoulders, but I welcomed it. For years, I had been sidelined and undervalued, but now, I finally had the chance to lead with the experience and cultural insight that had always been my greatest asset. It was no longer about proving myself to those who had doubted me, it was about building something meaningful, something that honored the relationships I had fought so hard to preserve. The first order of business was to meet with our key partners personally. I traveled extensively, flying to Hong Kong, Singapore, and Shanghai, reconnecting with old contacts and forging new alliances. Each meeting reminded me why trust and respect were currencies that no amount of money or corporate power could buy. When I spoke their language, sometimes literally, it wasn't just words, it was a bridge that spanned years of collaboration and shared goals. Back home, I restructured our team to emphasize collaboration and cultural sensitivity. I hired professionals who understood that global business wasn't just about numbers and efficiency but about people and nuance. I encouraged open dialogue and invested in training programs that nurtured empathy and adaptability. Slowly, the division transformed from a fractured, disheartened group into a cohesive, motivated team. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Some old wounds hadn't fully healed, and Lucas's shadow still lingered in some corners of the company. But I refused to let past mistakes define our future. Instead, I used those experiences as lessons, reminders of what not to repeat and motivations to strive harder. Outside of work, life also took on a new rhythm. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the chaos, and I allowed myself moments of rest and reflection. I realized that success wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder but about finding balance and purpose. The strength I'd gained through adversity gave me confidence, but humility kept me grounded. One afternoon, as I prepared for a major presentation with a prospective client, I paused and looked around my office. The framed photos of my family, the notes from my team, the awards for cultural excellence, they weren't just decorations. They were symbols of a journey marked by resilience, integrity, and growth. This new chapter wasn't just about reclaiming my career, it was about redefining what success meant on my own terms. And as I stepped into the future, I knew one thing for certain: I would never again let arrogance or disrespect overshadow the power of genuine connection. Looking back, it's clear how much I've changed, and how much the company has changed too. From the moment Lucas Harrington swaggered into Ridgemont with his flashy ideas and dismissive attitude, to now, where I lead with a focus on respect, empathy, and genuine partnership, the journey has been both painful and enlightening. The lessons I learned weren't just about business, they were about resilience, identity, and the kind of leader I wanted to be. When I accepted the offer to join Lawson and Reed after my consultancy with Ridgemont ended, many saw it as a fresh start, a chance to escape the chaos Lucas had created. But for me, it was more than that. It was a place that valued what I brought to the table: the cultural insight, the relationship building, the quiet strength that had always been my secret weapon. There, I found a home where my voice mattered, where I could influence decisions not through title alone but through earned respect. One of my proudest moments came when I re-established our partnership with Jinlong Industries, this time as a representative of Lawson and Reed. The trust we rebuilt was stronger than ever, founded on transparency, mutual respect, and the understanding that business is, at its core, about people. Mr. Chen and I often joke that it took two companies to teach Ridgemont what it truly means to lead. Yet, I haven't forgotten Ridgemont or the lessons it taught me. The company still struggles to recover from Lucas's hubris, a constant reminder that power without purpose is fragile. But I carry no bitterness, only the clarity that comes with experience. I know now that leadership is not about dominance or quick wins but about patience, humility, and the courage to listen. As I settle into my role, I'm more determined than ever to be the kind of leader who builds bridges instead of walls, who nurtures talent instead of tearing it down. I want to inspire others, especially women like me, to trust their knowledge and instincts, to stand firm even when the odds are stacked against them. This story isn't just mine, it's a story about every overlooked voice, every undervalued expert, every quiet leader who knows that success isn't measured by a title or paycheck but by the lives you touch and the respect you earn. And so, as I look toward the future, I do so with hope and conviction. The past shaped me, but it doesn't define me. I'm ready for whatever comes next, stronger, wiser, and more certain than ever that true power belongs to those who lead with heart.